A kid asked me once, smart kid, maybe 13, he said, "Professor Feynman, if I stop pushing this book, why does it stop moving?" And I froze, because the honest answer, the real answer, sounded insane. I wanted to tell him about inertia and friction, but that's not actually what's happening. What's really happening is that the book wants to keep moving forever through spacetime in a straight line, and the universe, through electromagnetism in the table's atoms, is screaming at it to stop. No force required, just geometry, just the shape of reality. I didn't say that to him. I gave him the textbook answer because I was a coward that day. But I'm not a coward anymore. And that's what this is about. Not physics in the way you learned it in school, with formulas to memorize and tests to pass. This is about something deeper. Something that, when you really get it, changes how you walk through the world. Changes how you think about control, about cause and effect, about whether you're a victim of circumstances or something else entirely. See, you've been taught that force is something that happens to you, that the universe pushes you around, that objects exert influence on each other. That cause and effect is this simple, clean story of action and reaction. Push something, it moves. Stop pushing, it stops. Gravity pulls you down. The wind pushes you sideways. Other people's actions force you to respond. It's all wrong. Not wrong in a trivial way, wrong in a way that matters, wrong in a way that keeps you small. What I'm going to tell you today is that force, the way you think about it, the way it's explained in textbooks, the way we use the word in everyday life, isn't fundamental to reality. It's not a thing the universe does. It's a story we tell ourselves to make sense of our experience. And like all stories, it's useful. It works. You can build bridges with it. You can launch rockets. You can pass your physics exam. But it's still just a story. And when you mistake the story for reality itself, you end up confused about some pretty important things. Things like why you feel stuck, why change feels so hard, why it seems like the world is constantly doing things to you instead of you moving through the world. So here's what I'm offering you today. I'm going to show you what's really happening when you push something, when you fall, when you feel the weight of your own body pressing down into your chair. I'm going to show you that what we call force is actually a description of geometry, the shape of space-time, the behavior of electromagnetic fields, the momentum you already have just by existing. And I'm going to show you why this matters, not just for understanding physics, but for understanding yourself, your life, your sense of agency in the world. Because here's the thing, if you think force is something that happens to you, you're a victim. The universe pushes you around. Circumstances knock you off course. Other people exert force on your life, and you have to react. You're passive, defensive, a billiard ball getting knocked from place to place by events outside your control. But if you understand that you're always in motion through space-time, that what you call force is really just you encountering the shape of reality as you move through it, then suddenly everything changes. You're not being pushed, you're navigating, you're not stuck. You're in motion, you've always been in motion, and the question isn't, what's pushing me? The question is, where am I going, and do I want to change direction? This isn't just philosophy. This is what the physics actually says when you dig deep enough. And most physicists won't tell you this because, honestly, it sounds crazy. It sounds like I'm playing word games or being deliberately obscure. But I'm not. I'm being more honest than your physics teacher ever was. So stick with me. I'm going to take you somewhere strange and beautiful. We're going to question everything you think you know about push and pull, about cause and effect, about what it means for something to act on something else. And by the end, if I do this right, you're going to see the world differently. Not just understand it differently, see it differently, feel it differently. Let's start with something simple, something you've experienced 1,000 times, but never really looked at closely. Imagine you're pushing a heavy desk across a room. Your muscles strain. You lean into it. You feel the resistance, the weight of it. The desk is heavy. It doesn't want to move. You push harder. It starts to slide. slowly. You can feel it pushing back against you, resisting your effort. Now, here's what you think is happening. You're exerting a force on the desk. The desk, because it has mass, and because there's friction between it and the floor, is exerting a force back against you. These forces interact. When your force exceeds the desk's resistance, it moves. Simple, right? That's what they taught you in school. Action and reaction. Newton's third law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Except that's not what's happening. Not really. Not at the level of what's actually going on in the universe. Let's slow it down. Let's look at what's really happening step by step, without the convenient shorthand of the word force. First, your brain sends electrical signals down your nerves to your muscles. These signals cause chemical reactions in your muscle fibers. Specifically, they cause protein molecules called actin and myosin to slide past each other. This sliding is powered by the breaking of chemical bonds in molecules of ATP. When those bonds break, energy is released, and that energy causes conformational changes in the protein molecules. The molecules change shape. Now, these proteins are part of your muscle fibers, which are part of your arm, which is touching the desk. Or rather, and this is important, which is very, very close to the desk, but not actually touching it. We'll come back to that. Your arm, which is made of atoms, gets very close to the desk, which is also made of atoms. The electrons in the atoms of your skin approach the electrons in the atoms of the desk's surface. And here's where something interesting happens. Electrons don't like to be close to other electrons. It's not a preference in an emotional sense. It's a fundamental property of quantum mechanics called the Pauli exclusion principle. Two electrons can't occupy the same quantum state. When the electron clouds of your atoms get too close to the electron clouds of the desk's atoms, they repel. Not because they're pushing in the way you push something. They repel because the mathematics of quantum field theory says that the probability of finding those electrons in overlapping positions approaches zero. So the electron clouds of your hand and the electron clouds of the desk are mutually exclusive. As your hand approaches the desk, the electromagnetic field, which is what electrons create and respond to, rearranges itself to keep these electron clouds separated. From your perspective, this feels like the desk pushing back against your hand. But the desk isn't doing anything. It's not trying. It's not exerting effort. It's just that the electromagnetic fields in that region of space won't allow your atoms and the desk's atoms to overlap. Now your muscles continue to contract. Your arm continues to accelerate toward where the desk is. But because the electromagnetic field won't let your hand and the desk occupy the same space, something has to give. In this case, because the desk isn't attached to the floor, and because the resistance from friction is less than the electromagnetic repulsion happening at the atomic level, the desk starts to move. But here's the thing. The desk doesn't move because you pushed it. It moves because it's following the path of least resistance through the configuration space of possible positions. The electromagnetic field is rearranging itself to minimize energy, and one way to do that is for the desk to shift position rather than for the electron clouds to try to overlap. You didn't push the desk. You created a situation where the lowest energy configuration of the electromagnetic field involved the desk being in a different location. The desk moved because that's what happens when you change the shape of the field it exists in. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, that's interesting, but it's also incredibly complicated. Why not just say, I pushed the desk? It's simpler. It gets the job done. Who cares about electron clouds and electromagnetic fields? And you're right. For almost every practical purpose, saying, I pushed the desk is fine. It's useful. It's how we build things and predict things and teach physics to beginners. But here's why I'm telling you this. Because the way you think about force shapes the way you think about everything else. If you think force is fundamental, if you think push and pull are built into the fabric of reality, then you think the universe is constantly acting on you. Things happen to you. You're subject to forces. You're reactive. But if you understand that what we call force is actually just a description of how fields and geometry behave, then you start to see that the universe isn't doing anything to you. The universe just is. It has a shape. It has properties. You're moving through it, and as you move, you encounter different configurations, different arrangements, different resistances. You're not a victim of forces. You're a trajectory moving through a landscape, and that changes everything. Let me give you another example. This one's going to sound even crazier, but I promise it'll make sense. You're sitting in a chair right now, probably. You can feel the weight of your body pressing down into the seat. You can feel gravity pulling you towards the center of the earth. This is so obvious, so fundamental to your experience, that it barely even registers as something to think about. Gravity is pulling you down. The chair is pushing you up. These forces balance out so you don't fall through the floor or float away into the ceiling. Simple, right? Wrong. Completely, totally, fundamentally wrong. Gravity isn't pulling you down. Gravity isn't a force. It never was. I know how that sounds. You can feel it right now, can't you? That weight, that pull. How can I possibly say it's not real? Stay with me. In 1907, Einstein had what he later called the happiest thought of my life. He was working at the patent office in Bern, thinking about gravity, and he imagined a man falling off a roof. And he realized something extraordinary. While that man is falling, he doesn't feel his own weight. He's weightless. If he has a cup of coffee, it falls next to him at the same rate, so from his perspective, the coffee is just floating there. From his perspective, there's no gravity. Now you might say, well, sure, but he's accelerating towards the ground. That's gravity. That's a force acting on him. But here's Einstein's insight. What if he's not accelerating? What if, from the perspective of the falling man, he's just floating there, perfectly still, in the absence of any forces? And what if the ground is accelerating up toward him? Sounds crazy, right? The ground is accelerating up? The ground is sitting still. We're standing on it. It's not moving. Except it is. From the perspective of someone in free fall, someone following what we call a geodesic through spacetime, the ground is accelerating upward at 9.8 meters per second squared. Let me try to explain this differently. Imagine you're in deep space, far away from any planets or stars. You're just floating there. No gravity, no forces acting on you. You're in what we call inertial motion. You're following a straight line through spacetime, not accelerating, not changing velocity. You're in free fall, even though there's nothing to fall toward. Now imagine someone builds a floor under you and starts accelerating it upward. Suddenly that floor hits you. You feel weight. From your perspective, you're being pushed. There's a force acting on you. The floor is accelerating into you. From the floor's perspective, you fell and hit it. But really, the floor accelerated up and hit you. Now, here's the thing Einstein realized. Being in free fall in a gravitational field is exactly the same, physically identical, to floating in deep space with no gravity at all. And being on the surface of the Earth, feeling your weight, feeling gravity, is exactly the same, physically identical, to being in deep space with a floor accelerating up into you. These aren't analogies. They're not similar situations. They're the same situation, described from different perspectives. When you're standing on the Earth, you're not being pulled down by gravity. You're trying to move in a straight line through curved space-time, which is what free fall is, and the ground is in your way. The ground, held up by the electromagnetic forces in the rock and metal of the Earth, is accelerating upward into you at 9.8 meters per second squared. You're in motion. You're always in motion. You're moving through space-time at the speed of light. All of your motion right now is through the time dimension, which is why you're aging, why you're experiencing the flow of time. And because you're sitting in a gravitational field, the geometry of space-time is curved. You're trying to follow a geodesic, a straight line through that curved space, but the ground won't let you. The ground is accelerating up into you, and you experience that acceleration as weight. Gravity isn't pulling you down. The ground is pushing you up, and that pushing, that acceleration, is what you feel as weight. This isn't word games. This isn't me being clever. This is what general relativity says. This is what the math says. This is what the universe is actually doing. And when you understand this, when you really get it, something shifts in your head. Because suddenly you realize that almost everything you call force is actually something else. It's geometry. It's the shape of spacetime. It's fields interacting. It's the momentum you already have, being redirected by encounters with the structure of reality. You're not being acted upon. You're moving through a landscape that has shape and texture and properties. And yes, that landscape affects how you move, but it's not pushing you around. You're navigating it. Let me tell you why this matters so much to me. Why I keep coming back to this, why I think about it, why I wish I'd been brave enough to tell that 13-year-old kid the truth instead of the comfortable lie. Because the way we talk about force, the way we frame it as something that happens to us, it seeps into everything. It shapes how we think about our lives, our choices, our agency in the world. You hear people say things like, "I was forced to do it. I had no choice. Circumstances pushed me into this. I'm stuck. I can't move. The weight of the world is on my shoulders." And I'm not saying these feelings aren't real. They are. When you feel stuck, you're stuck. When you feel like you have no choices, that's a real experience. I'm not here to invalidate that. But what if the story you're telling yourself about why you're stuck is wrong? What if you're not stuck because external forces are holding you in place? What if you're stuck because you don't realize you're already in motion and you just need to redirect that motion? This is what the physics teaches us, if we're willing to listen. You're always in motion through space-time. Always. Right now, as you sit there listening to me, you're moving through time at maximum speed. You're aging. Cells are dividing. Chemical reactions are happening in your body. Thoughts are firing in your brain. You're not static. You're a process, not a thing. And when you move through space, when you walk across a room, drive to work, fly to another country, you're not adding motion to stillness. You're redirecting motion you already have. You're changing the balance between your motion through time and your motion through space. This is real physics, by the way. This isn't a metaphor. When you move through space faster, you move through time slower. It's called time dilation, and it's measurable. GPS satellites have to account for it. Astronauts on the International Space Station age slightly slower than people on Earth. It's a tiny difference, microseconds over months, but it's real. You're always moving through space-time at the speed of light. The universe doesn't push you into motion. You're already in motion. You've always been in motion. From the moment you were born until the moment you die, you're moving through space-time at the speed of light. The question is never, how do I start moving? The question is, where am I going, and is that where I want to go? And that's a completely different question. It requires a completely different mindset. It requires you to stop thinking of yourself as a passive object being acted upon by forces and start thinking of yourself as a trajectory, a direction, a momentum. Now, let me complicate this a little bit more, because I don't want you to walk away thinking, "Oh, okay, force isn't real. I'm always in motion. I've got it figured out." Because there's a paradox here, a deep one. And if I don't address it, you're going to bump into it eventually and think I was lying to you. Here's the paradox. Even though force isn't fundamental, even though it's a useful fiction, a map rather than the territory, we can't do physics without it. Seriously, try it. Try to explain to someone why a ball falls without using the concept of force or pull or gravity. Try to design a bridge without talking about stress and strain and load-bearing forces. Try to launch a rocket without discussing thrust and drag and force vectors. You can do it, technically. You can formulate all of physics in terms of fields and geometry and energy. Some physicists do. But it's so mathematically abstract, so divorced from everyday experience, that it's nearly useless for actually building things and making predictions. So we use force, We teach it in schools, we use it in engineering, we use it in everyday language. And it works. It works incredibly well. Newton's laws, the ones you learned in high school, the ones that are all about force and mass and acceleration, those laws are technically wrong. We know they're wrong. They're approximations that break down when things move really fast or when gravity gets really strong. But for everything you and I will ever experience directly, for cars and airplanes and baseballs and buildings, Newton's laws work perfectly. So here's the paradox. Force is a useful fiction that doesn't exist at the fundamental level of reality, but we can't actually function without using it. And you know what? That's okay. That's actually profound. It means reality operates on multiple levels simultaneously. There's the level of your direct experience, where force feels real and useful and necessary, and there's the level of fundamental physics, where force dissolves into fields and geometry and space-time curvature. Both are true. Both matter. The trick is knowing which level you're operating on and not confusing one for the other. When you're solving a problem, when you're building something, fixing something, making something work, use force, use Newton's laws, use the convenient fiction. It's there to help you. But when you're trying to understand reality itself, when you're trying to understand what's really happening at the deepest level, let go of force. See it for what it is. A map, not the territory. A description, not a thing. And most importantly, when you're thinking about your own life, your own sense of agency, your own experience of being in the world, be very, very careful about the language of force. Be careful about saying, I was forced, or I'm stuck, or circumstances pushed me. Because that language, that framing, it keeps you small, it keeps you reactive, it makes you a victim of forces instead of a trajectory with momentum. Let me give you a practical example of what I'm talking about. Let's say you're in a job you hate. You feel stuck. Every morning you wake up and the thought of going to work fills you with dread. But you go anyway because you have bills to pay, because you have responsibilities, because you don't see any other options. The language you probably use, the story you probably tell yourself, is something like this. I'm forced to stay in this job. I have no choice. Economic circumstances, family obligations, the job market, all these forces are keeping me here. I'm stuck. And listen, I'm not going to tell you that economic circumstances aren't real, or that family obligations don't matter, or that the job market doesn't constrain your options. All of that is real. But here's a different way to frame it. You're in motion through your life. Every day you're moving forward through time. You're making choices. Even the choice to stay is a choice. You're navigating a landscape that has certain features, certain obstacles, certain constraints. But you're not stuck. You're moving. You're always moving. The question is whether you're moving in a direction you want to go. See the difference? In the first framing, you're passive. Forces act on you. You're a victim. You're stuck. In the second framing, you're active. You're a trajectory. You have momentum. Yes, there are obstacles. Yes, the landscape is constrained. But you're navigating it. You're moving through it. And if you don't like where you're going, you can redirect. Not instantly. Not without effort or cost. But you can change direction. This isn't positive thinking. This isn't me telling you to just decide to be happy and everything will magically work out. This is about accurately understanding the situation you're in. Because here's the thing, if you think you're stuck, if you think forces are holding you in place, you stop looking for ways to redirect. You stop navigating. You just endure. You wait for something external to change, for some force to release its grip on you. But if you understand that you're in motion, that you have momentum, that the question is about direction rather than about overcoming forces, then you start asking different questions. Not, how do I break free, but where am I going, and how do I steer toward where I want to be? And those are very different questions that lead to very different actions. Let me tell you about something that happened to me years ago. I was working on a problem in quantum electrodynamics. Tough problem. I'd been banging my head against it for months. Every approach I tried hit a wall, and I started thinking of it in terms of force, in terms of resistance. The problem was resisting me. The math was pushing back. I was stuck. And then one day I was walking to lunch, not thinking about the problem at all, and I saw some kids playing with a frisbee. One kid threw it, and it wobbled in this weird way as it flew through the air. And I started thinking about the angular momentum of that frisbee, about how it was moving through space and rotating at the same time, and suddenly I saw my problem differently. I'd been thinking about it as if I was pushing against something, as if the problem had resistance that I needed to overcome with greater force. But that wasn't what was happening. I was moving through a mathematical landscape, and I'd been trying to go in a direction that didn't exist. I wasn't being resisted. I was trying to move through a region of configuration space that wasn't actually possible. So I changed direction. I approached the problem from a completely different angle. And it opened up. Not because I pushed harder, not because I overcame some resistance, but because I stopped trying to force my way through and started navigating more carefully. The problem didn't change. I changed. My trajectory through the problem space changed. And that's what I'm trying to give you here. That shift. That reframe. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let me talk about something that's probably on your mind, something that makes this whole conversation feel abstract and theoretical instead of practical and useful. Let me talk about other people. Because it's one thing to reframe your relationship with a desk or a book or a job. But what about when another person does something that affects you? What about when someone cuts you off in traffic, or says something hurtful, or makes a decision that impacts your life? Aren't they exerting force on you? Aren't they pushing you around? And here's where the physics gets really interesting, really useful, in a way that might surprise you. When someone does something, when they speak, when they act, when they make a choice, they're not exerting force on you in any physical sense. They're sending information. They're creating vibrations in air molecules that become sound waves that hit your ear and get converted to electrical signals in your auditory nerve. Or they're moving their body in ways that reflect light that hits your eyes and gets converted to electrical signals in your optic nerve. They're not pushing you. They're not pulling you. They're existing in the world, doing things, and you're perceiving those things and interpreting them and responding to your interpretation. Now, I know that sounds like I'm saying their actions don't matter or that you shouldn't be affected by what people do. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that the mechanism isn't force. It's information plus interpretation plus response. Someone says something cruel to you. The cruelty doesn't travel from them to you like a thrown rock. The sound waves travel. Your brain processes those sound waves, compares them to your memories and experiences and fears, generates an emotional response based on your history and your meaning-making systems, and you feel hurt. The hurt is real. I'm not denying that. But the mechanism matters. Because if you think someone's words are forcing you to feel hurt, if you think there's a direct causal relationship where their action creates your emotion like a cue ball striking another ball, then you're helpless. They did something to you. You're a victim of their force. But if you understand that your hurt is your brain's interpretation of their action, filtered through your history and your fears and your beliefs, then suddenly you have leverage. Not to make the hurt go away instantly. Not to pretend it doesn't matter, but to work with it, to understand it, to recognize that you're not being acted upon, you're responding, and responses can change. This is where this whole conversation about force stops being abstract physics and becomes something you can use in your actual life. Every time you feel like someone is making you feel something, pause. Every time you feel like circumstances are forcing your hand, pause. Every time you feel stuck or pushed or pulled or trapped, pause and ask yourself, what if this isn't force? What if I'm not being acted upon? What if I'm in motion through a landscape and this is just a feature of the landscape I'm encountering. What if I have more agency here than the language of force suggests? Sometimes the answer is that you don't have much agency. Sometimes the constraints are real and severe. I'm not trying to sell you some toxic positivity where you can just choose to feel differently about anything. But often, more often than you think, the language of force is obscuring the reality of the situation. You're not stuck. You're moving slowly, or you're moving in a direction you don't like, or you're encountering resistance. But you're not stuck. You're not being forced. You're navigating. And navigation is a skill you can improve. Let me give you one more physics example before we get into the practical stuff, because I want you to understand how deep this goes. You know about atoms, right? Little particles, electrons orbiting a nucleus, all that stuff. And you probably learned that the electrons are held in orbit by the attractive force between the positively charged nucleus and the negatively charged electron. The nucleus pulls the electron wants to fly away, and they balance out into this nice, stable orbit. Except none of that is true. Not even a little bit. First of all, electrons don't orbit the nucleus like planets orbit the sun. That's a useful lie we tell beginners, but it's completely wrong. Electrons don't have definite positions. They exist as probability clouds, regions where they're likely to be found if you measure them. They're smeared out across space in these weird quantum ways that don't make intuitive sense. Second, there's no force holding them in place, not in the way you think of force. What's happening is that the electron is in a quantum state, and that state is stable because it minimizes the energy of the system. The electron isn't being pulled toward the nucleus. It's existing in a configuration of the electromagnetic field that happens to be low energy and stable. If you try to move the electron, if you add energy to the system, the electron doesn't get pulled back by force. It transitions to a different quantum state. And if you remove the electron entirely, if you ionize the atom, the electron doesn't escape some attractive force. It just transitions to a free particle state, where it's no longer bound by the electromagnetic field configuration of the atom. No force, just fields, just configurations, just states. And this is true all the way down. At the deepest level of reality we can currently probe, there are no forces. There are fields and particles and symmetries and conservation laws. But no forces in the way you imagine them. Particles don't push each other. They exchange other particles, virtual particles we call them, and those exchanges result in changes to momentum and position. But it's not pushing. It's not pulling. It's something weirder and more abstract. And yet, when we do calculations, we use force. We use the concept of attractive and repulsive forces. We draw arrows on diagrams. We write F equals ma and solve for acceleration. Because it works, because it's useful, because the fiction is so much more convenient than the reality that we can't function without it. So here's what I want you to take away from all this physics. Force is a layer of interpretation we place on top of reality. It's not built into the universe. It's built into our description of the universe. And that means we can choose to use it or not use it, depending on what serves us best in any given situation. When you're building a bridge, use force. When you're calculating a trajectory, use force. When you're teaching basic physics, use force. But when you're thinking about your life, about your choices, about your sense of agency in the world, be very careful with force. Because it carries baggage, it carries assumptions about passivity and victimhood and being acted upon, and those assumptions might not serve you. All right, let's get practical. Let's talk about what you can actually do with all this. Because I didn't bring you this far just to make your head spin with weird physics. I brought you here because I think this changes things. Real things. Things that matter. For the next week, just 1 week, I want you to pay attention to your language around force. Every time you catch yourself saying or thinking something like, I was forced to, I have no choice, I'm stuck, circumstances are pushing me, the weight of the world, I can't move. I want you to pause. Don't judge yourself. Don't beat yourself up for using that language. Just notice it. Just become aware of how often you frame your experience in terms of forces acting on you. And then, if you can, try to reframe it. Not to make yourself feel better, not to engage in positive thinking, but to more accurately describe what's actually happening. Instead of, "I'm stuck in this job," try, "I'm choosing to stay in this job while I figure out my next move." Instead of, "I was forced to say yes," try, "I said yes because I was afraid of the consequences of saying no." Instead of, "The traffic is making me late," try, "I'm moving through a city where many people are also trying to move, and the infrastructure creates delays." Instead of, "His words hurt me," try, "I'm feeling hurt in response to his words because they triggered old wounds about being criticized." Do you see the difference? In each reframe, you're acknowledging reality, the constraints, the emotions, the difficulties, but you're placing yourself as an active participant rather than a passive victim. You're navigating rather than being buffeted about. And here's what's weird. This reframe, even though it might seem like a superficial word game, actually changes your neurology. I'm serious. When you think of yourself as being forced, as being stuck, your brain activates different neural pathways than when you think of yourself as choosing, as navigating, as being in motion. The language of force activates threat responses. It activates the parts of your brain associated with helplessness and fear. It makes you freeze or fight or flee. The language of navigation activates planning regions. It activates the parts of your brain associated with problem-solving and creativity. It makes you look for routes and possibilities. Same situation, different framing, different neurology, different outcomes. This isn't magic. This is just how brains work. Your brain takes its cues from the stories you tell about your experience. Tell a story of being forced, and your brain prepares for force. Tell a story of navigating, and your brain prepares to navigate. So that's practice 1. Notice your language around force and try to reframe it in terms of motion, navigation, and choice. Practice 2 is a little stranger, but bear with me. Once a day, I want you to do what I call the contact meditation. It sounds woo-woo, but it's actually just applied physics. Find a table or a wall. Put your hand on it. Press down. Feel the solidity of it. Feel the resistance. Your hand cannot pass through the table. The table is solid. It's stopping your hand. It's pushing back. Now remember what I told you. You're not actually touching the table. The electromagnetic fields in your atoms and the electromagnetic fields in the table's atoms are repelling each other. There's a gap at the quantum level. Always. You've never touched anything in your entire life. You've only ever felt electromagnetic repulsion. Sit with that for a moment. Let your brain wrestle with it. You're pressing your hand down. You can feel the table, and yet you're not touching it. There's a force. No, wait, not a force. There's an interaction between fields that creates the sensation of solidity. But at the fundamental level, there's emptiness, space, separation. Now ask yourself, if I've never touched anything, what does connection mean? What does contact mean? What does intimacy mean? This isn't nihilistic. I'm not trying to make you feel alone or disconnected from the world. I'm trying to show you that the things you think create connection, physical proximity, physical contact, aren't what create connection at all. You can be physically pressed up against someone and feel completely disconnected. You can be on opposite sides of the world from someone and feel deeply, profoundly connected. Connection isn't about force. It's not about physical contact. It's about resonance. It's about patterns, recognizing patterns. It's about fields interacting in ways that create coherence and harmony. And once you get that, once you really feel it in your body, it changes how you relate to people. You stop trying to force connection. You stop thinking that if you just get close enough, if you just touch enough, if you just exert enough influence, you'll create intimacy. You start understanding that connection is something that emerges when patterns align, and you can't force patterns to align. You can only notice when they do and nurture that alignment. This is the emotional wisdom hidden inside the physics. The universe is teaching you something about relationships, about intimacy, about how things actually come together. And it's not through force. It's never through force. Practice 3. The momentum check. Once a day, ask yourself, where am I going right now? Not physically. Not, I'm going to the store or I'm going to work. I mean, what direction is my life moving? What trajectory am I on? And don't answer with where you want to be going or where you think you should be going. Answer with where you're actually going if you keep making the choices you're currently making. If you keep eating the way you're eating, where are you going? If you keep relating to your partner the way you're relating, where are you going? If you keep working the hours you're working, thinking the thoughts you're thinking, spending your time the way you're spending it, where are you going? This is hard. It's really hard, because often the answer is somewhere you don't want to go, and when you see that clearly, when you really acknowledge it, it's painful. But here's the thing. You can't change direction if you don't know what direction you're going. You can't steer if you think you're stuck. And remember, you're always in motion. Even if you feel stuck, you're moving through time. You're aging. Your body is changing. Your relationships are evolving. Your circumstances are shifting. You're not static. You're a process. So the question is never, how do I start moving? The question is, am I moving in a direction I want to go? And if the answer is no, then the next question is, what's the smallest change in direction I can make right now? Not a huge change, not a complete life overhaul, not quitting your job and moving to Bali and starting over. Just, what's the smallest adjustment to my trajectory? Maybe it's going to bed 30 minutes earlier. Maybe it's sending a text to a friend you've been meaning to connect with. Maybe it's taking a different route to work. Maybe it's saying no to one thing so you can say yes to something else. Small changes in direction, consistently applied over time, result in massive changes in destination. That's just geometry. That's just math. If you're on a trajectory toward point A and you adjust your heading by just a few degrees, after 1,000 miles you end up at point B instead, which might be hundreds of miles away from point A. You don't need force to change direction. You just need to adjust your heading. And you can do that right now, today, with the momentum you already have. Now let me talk about something that's probably been bothering you this whole time, something I need to address directly, or else you're going to walk away from this thinking I'm full of it. What about the times when you really don't have a choice? What about when force is genuinely being applied to you in ways you can't just reframe away? What about violence? What about coercion? What about abuse? What about situations where someone physically bigger and stronger is actually using force against you? And here's where I need to be very clear. I am not saying that violence isn't real. I am not saying that if someone hits you, you're just interpreting electromagnetic repulsion and it's all in your head. I am not saying that abuse victims should just reframe their experience and everything will be fine. Physical violence is real. Coercion is real. There are situations where someone uses their physical size, strength, or weapons to constrain your options to the point where you genuinely don't have meaningful choice. And in those situations, the physics I've been describing doesn't make the violence go away. It doesn't make the coercion less real. It doesn't give you agency you don't actually have. What I am saying is that even in those situations, understanding the actual mechanics of what's happening can be useful. Not to minimize the experience, not to blame the victim, but to understand reality accurately so you can respond as effectively as possible. When someone hits you, they're not exerting force on you in some mystical way. They're accelerating their hand or foot or weapon toward your body. The electromagnetic fields repel, and momentum is transferred from their atoms to your atoms. Energy is transferred, damage happens, pain happens, but they're not controlling you with some kind of force beam. They're not taking away your agency through some fundamental physics mechanism. They're creating a situation where the costs of certain choices are extremely high, high enough that many choices become effectively impossible. That's different from force in the way we've been talking about it. That's constraint through threatened or actual harm. And understanding that difference matters because it affects how you think about escape, resistance, recovery. If you think of abuse as a force that's acting on you, that's holding you in place, then escape seems impossible. The force is too strong. You can't overcome it. But if you understand that abuse is a pattern of behavior designed to constrain your choices by making certain options too costly, then escape becomes a question of changing the cost-benefit calculation, of finding ways to make escape less costly or staying more costly, of finding resources and support that shift the landscape. This is why I'm so careful about the language of force, because it's not just abstract physics, it's how we think about power and agency and what's possible, and getting it wrong, misunderstanding the mechanism, can trap you in ways that the situation itself might not actually require. I want to be very clear. If you're in a situation where someone is using violence or threats of violence to control you, that's real, that's serious, and you should seek help. Nothing I'm saying here is meant to minimize that or suggest you can just think your way out of it. What I'm saying is that even in extreme situations, you have more agency than the language of force suggests. Not unlimited agency, not easy agency, but some, and that some might be enough to start moving in a different direction. All right, let's bring this home. Let's talk about what all of this means in the big picture. Because I've taken you through a lot of physics and philosophy and practical exercises, and I want to make sure it all comes together into something coherent. Here's what I'm really trying to tell you. The universe doesn't push you around. It doesn't exert force on you. It doesn't act on you. It doesn't make you do anything. The universe simply is. It has structure. It has properties. It has geometry and fields and conservation laws. And you exist within that universe, moving through it, always moving, always in motion, from the moment you're born until the moment you die. And as you move through this universe, you encounter things. You encounter the electromagnetic fields of other atoms. You encounter the curved space-time around massive objects. You encounter other people who are also trajectories moving through space-time, who are also navigating this strange landscape we find ourselves in. And these encounters affect you. They change your trajectory. They redirect your momentum. They create experiences, pleasant, unpleasant, painful, joyful, confusing, clarifying. But they don't force you. Not in the way that word suggests, not in a way that strips you of agency and choice and responsibility. You're not a billiard ball being knocked around by a cue stick. You're a conscious being with momentum and direction and the ability to adjust your course. Not unlimited ability, not magical ability, but real ability, constrained by reality but not eliminated by it. And when you understand this, when you really get it in your bones, everything changes. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, subtly, profoundly. You stop feeling so helpless. You stop waiting for circumstances to change before you can change. You stop blaming forces outside yourself for the trajectory you're on. And this is important. You also stop blaming yourself in that harsh, judgmental way that assumes you should have perfect control over everything. Because understanding that force isn't real also means understanding that you're not all-powerful. You can't just force things to happen through sheer will. You're navigating a landscape that has real constraints, real obstacles, real features that limit your options. So you become, and this is the goal, this is what I want for you, you become both more responsible and more compassionate. More responsible because you recognize your agency, your ability to adjust course, your role in determining your trajectory. And more compassionate because you recognize your constraints, your limits, the ways the landscape genuinely shapes your options. You stop being a victim, and you also stop being a tyrant to yourself. You become a navigator, someone who's in motion, who's always been in motion, who will always be in motion, and who's learning, gradually, imperfectly, but genuinely, how to steer. That's what the physics teaches us, if we're willing to listen. That's what all of this is really about. Let me leave you with one final thought, one final reframe that I think ties everything together. You know how I said you're always moving through space-time at the speed of light? How all of your motion right now is through the time dimension, which is why you're aging, why time is passing. Here's something beautiful about that. Every moment you exist, you're traveling 300,000 kilometers. Not through space, through space-time. Through the fabric of reality itself. You're on a journey covering cosmic distances, even when you're sitting still. You're an explorer of space-time, mapping out a unique trajectory that has never been traveled before and will never be traveled again. And yes, the landscape constrains you. Yes, there are obstacles. Yes, there are places you can't go and paths you can't take. But within those constraints, you have genuine freedom. The freedom to adjust your heading. The freedom to choose which features of the landscape to navigate around and which to move through. You're not being pushed through this journey by forces outside yourself. You're traveling it. Actively. Consciously. With agency. And that makes all the difference. So here's my challenge to you, my invitation, my hope for you coming out of this conversation. Stop thinking of yourself as stuck. Stop thinking of yourself as being forced. Stop thinking of yourself as a victim of circumstances. Start thinking of yourself as a trajectory, as a path through space-time, as a journey that's already in motion and has always been in motion. And ask yourself every single day, where am I going? Is that where I want to go? And if not, what's the smallest adjustment I can make to my heading right now? Not next week. Not when circumstances change. Not when the forces aligned against you finally relent. Now. Today. With the momentum you already have. Because here's the secret that the physics reveals, the truth that changes everything once you really get it. You're not stuck. You've never been stuck. You've always been in motion. You just didn't realize you could steer. And now you do. You're not broken. You're not powerless. You're not at the mercy of forces you can't control. You're a conscious being moving through a universe that simply is, encountering its structure, navigating its landscape, adjusting your course as you learn and grow and change. And that recognition, that reframe, that shift in perspective, that's what frees you. Not from constraints, not from obstacles, not from the reality of the landscape, but from the illusion that you have no agency, no choice, no ability to steer. The universe doesn't push you around. It never did. You've been navigating all along. You just didn't know it. Now you know. So go navigate. Go steer. Go adjust your trajectory toward something that matters to you, something that calls to you, something that feels true. You don't need to wait for permission. You don't need to wait for circumstances to change. You don't need to overcome some great force holding you in place. You just need to adjust your heading. And you can do that right now. If this resonated with you, if something in this conversation shifted something in you, even just a little bit, I'd love for you to let me know. Hit the like button. Not for me, not for the algorithm, but as a way of marking this moment, of acknowledging that something changed. And drop a comment telling me what landed for you, what surprised you, what you're going to try. I read the comments, I think about them. Your insights matter. And if you want more of this kind of thing, physics that doesn't just explain the universe but changes how you experience being in it, subscribe. But only if it's honest. Only if you actually want it. I'm not here to collect subscribers. I'm here to have real conversations about real things with people who are genuinely curious. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Thank you for being willing to question something so fundamental, so obvious seeming, as force. That takes courage. That takes genuine curiosity. And I respect that. Now go move through spacetime with a little more awareness of what you're actually doing. Go navigate with a little more intention. Go steer towards something beautiful. The universe is waiting, not pushing, not pulling, just waiting. And you're already in motion, so go.